My name is Richard Feynman. A poor clerk from southern India named Srinivasa Ramanujan once did something mathematics is not supposed to forgive. He wrote down answers without proof, no path, no staircase, no explanation, just conclusions. And the terrifying part is this: again and again, he was right. He died in 1920, when I was barely 2 years old, an ocean away in New York. He and I never met. We never could have. And still, all these years later, mathematics has been chasing his missing proofs. And so have I. I want you to understand how strange that is. Not a man who was wrong, a man who was right, and could not, or would not, show how. His story does not begin with him. It begins with a letter. A cold morning in Cambridge, England, January of 1913. The man holding that letter was one of the finest mathematicians in the country, G.H. Hardy, and he very nearly threw it away. It had traveled all the way from Madras in the south of India. The sender was not a professor, not a member of any society. He called himself a clerk, a man who kept accounts at a shipping office for £20 a year. He was 25 years old, and he was writing to Hardy because there was nowhere else in the world to send what he had found. Folded inside were 10 pages, close to 120 mathematical results. Now, every famous mathematician receives letters like that, pages from strangers certain they have solved the unsolvable. Almost always, it is nonsense. Hardy had thrown such letters away before, so he began to read this one the way you read something you have already decided to ignore. And then he stopped, because the results on those pages were not the work of a crank. Some of them Hardy recognized, real theorems already known, rediscovered by a man who clearly had no idea they already existed. Others he did not recognize at all. Strange identities, infinite series that close too neatly, claims about prime numbers that no amateur should have been able to reach, and almost none of it came with a proof. Hold on to that word, proof. He had sent answers, with the road to them missing. He had written down truths that nobody in Cambridge yet knew how to prove, and some would take the world 100 years to catch. Let me be fair to Hardy. His first reaction was not wonder, it was suspicion. And as a scientist, I understand that completely. Mathematics is built on proof. Nothing is believed until it has been shown, step by step, beyond any doubt. A page of results with no proofs is not, by the standards of Cambridge, an achievement. It is a claim, and claims can be wrong. Claims can be copied. Claims can be invented by someone clever enough to sound deep. So Hardy tested him. He went through the letter hunting for the mistake, the one error that would let him file these pages away with all the others, and forget the whole thing by morning. He did not find it the way he expected to. Yes, some results were already known. A skeptic could say they had been copied, but the familiar results were tangled together with statements so strange that no textbook in Europe contained them. You cannot copy what has never been written down. These were not the wild guesses of an amateur. They carried the quiet confidence of things that were simply true. So Hardy did something he rarely did. That same evening, he carried the letter across Trinity College to find the one man whose judgment he trusted as much as his own, his collaborator John Littlewood. And the two of them sat up late into the night, going through the pages line by line, two of the finest mathematicians in England, and they could not keep up. Hold on to that, because it tells you exactly what kind of man had written those pages. They could not dismiss it, and worse, they could not fully follow it. And that left Hardy in an impossible position. If Ramanujan was wrong, the letter was nonsense. If Ramanujan was right, Cambridge, the home of modern proof, had just been beaten by a clerk no one had trained. Hardy said afterward that those formulas had to be true, because if they were not, No one would have possessed the imagination to invent them. He meant it as the highest praise he could give. But listen closely, and you can hear the fear underneath the praise. Because Hardy did not understand everything on those pages. And if you have ever been handed something you could not explain by someone who should not have been able to make it, you know which part frightened him. It was not the parts he understood. It was the parts he did not. A fraud he could expose. An ordinary genius he could measure. But this was something else. A man handing over his conclusions and keeping the road to them entirely to himself. This is where Ramanujan becomes difficult to explain. I will be honest with you. It is difficult for me too. Explaining hard things was my life's work. Here is how mathematics was done in Cambridge. They climbed. Every theorem was a staircase. You began on solid ground, with something already proven, and you rose one careful step at a time, and you never trusted the next step until the one beneath you held your full weight. The proof was not a formality. The proof was the mathematics. Ramanujan did not climb. He wrote like a man who had already reached the roof and was calling the answer down to the rest of us, still standing at the bottom of the stairs. When Hardy later asked him, face to face in England, how he had reached a particular result, the explanations often did not satisfy. Not because Ramanujan was hiding anything, because the steps Hardy needed had simply never been part of how he saw the problem. He saw the destination. The journey, for him, was almost invisible. Take one example. There is a corner of mathematics called the partition of numbers. Simply, how many ways a whole number can be broken into smaller whole numbers. To you and me, that sounds harmless. To mathematicians, it becomes a jungle within seconds. Ramanujan walked into that jungle and came back with patterns the rest of the world had not even known to look for. Now, here is something I can tell you as a physicist. I knew the feeling of an answer arriving before the proof. Every scientist who has done real work knows it. That quiet certainty that something is true long before you can show why. It is one of the most thrilling feelings there is. But I always had to climb back down. I always had to build the staircase, one step at a time, or the answer did not count. That was the rule. And the rule was right. Ramanujan, it seemed, did not always need the staircase at all. And that is the thing the rest of us still cannot explain. For Cambridge, that was almost unbearable. An answer with no proof was not an ending. It was an open question wearing the costume of a solution. Every unproven line on those 10 pages was a door left standing open, and someone would have to walk through each one. But here is what took the world years to understand. The missing proofs were not a weakness. They were not gaps left by ignorance. They were the whole mystery. The question was never only, is this result true? The question was, what kind of mind reaches the truth and then does not need to explain how? Hardy had spent his life believing proof and truth were the same thing. Ramanujan had quietly pulled them apart, and he never told anyone how. In the spring of 1914, Ramanujan came to England. It was not a small thing for him to do. It meant leaving his home, his mother, his faith, and crossing an ocean his caste forbade him ever to cross. He came anyway, because he believed the answers inside him mattered more than his own comfort. And if you have ever risked something safe for something you could not prove yet, you already understand him a little. For 5 years, he worked beside Hardy at Cambridge. 5 years. That was all the time the world would ever get with him. Remember that, because it is running out faster than anyone in this story knows. You might think his arrival solved the mystery. The man himself finally in the room, ready to fill in every missing proof. Some were filled in. Together, Hardy and Ramanujan tamed the partition jungle, a problem that had quietly defeated everyone before them. But the notebooks did not empty. They filled. For every result they pinned down, he produced more, page after page, in his own hand, in his own order, obeying his own logic. They were not textbooks. They were ruins, fragments of a civilization that only one man had ever walked through, and that the rest of us could enter only slowly, room by room, long after he was gone. Because he did not have long. The cold, the rationing, an illness he could not shake, they wore him down. In 1919, he went home to India. In the spring of 1920, Ramanujan died. He was 32 years old. When he died, mathematics did not just lose a man. It lost the map that had been inside his head. And here is the part that still unsettles me, the part I need you to stay with me for. The chase did not end. It grew stranger. More than half a century after his death, another of his notebooks was found, lost pages waiting for decades among another man's papers in a Cambridge library. Mathematicians are working through them right now, proving results. Ramanujan scribbled in a few moments and never explained. Some have taken decades. A few are still open today. He has kept the world busy from inside his grave. And he never once told us how he knew. So we are left, you and I, with the only question that ever truly mattered. How? I have heard every explanation. Perhaps it was pure intuition. Perhaps obsession. A man who thought about numbers so constantly that the patterns rose up to meet him. Perhaps memory, or some gift for seeing structure, where the rest of us see only symbols. Ramanujan himself said it felt like something given, that the answers came to him in his sleep. I am a scientist. I will not hand you a conclusion I cannot prove, so I will not tell you which of those answers is the true one. I do not know. No one does, and that after 100 years is the honest position. But I will tell you what frightens me, and what frightens me still. It was not that Ramanujan had answers. Plenty of people have answers. It is that he was so often right about deep, difficult, genuinely new mathematics before anyone alive knew how to reach the place he was pointing at. He arrived first. The proof, the path, the certainty, all of it was built afterward by other people, sometimes long after he was dead. If you have ever known something was true before you could explain why, a quiet certainty you could not yet defend to anyone, then you have stood for one moment in the smallest corner of the room where Ramanujan lived his entire life. And I will admit something to you. I was considered a clever man. I trusted my intuition, and I followed it a long way. But when I read about Ramanujan, I do not feel like a fellow traveler. I feel like one of the people standing at the bottom of the stairs, looking up. In an earlier story, you may have heard it said that Ramanujan dreamed his mathematics, that the answers came to him in his sleep. Perhaps they did, but that was never the deepest mystery. The deepest mystery is simpler and stranger. It is that when he woke, the answers were still there. He did not just leave mathematics a pile of results. He left it something far harder to live with. The proof that one human mind had reached places the rest of the world would spend a century still trying to enter. My name is Richard Feynman, and Ramanujan is the one mind. After all these years, I still cannot explain